Good morning and welcome to the North Carolina Department of Information Technology's Division of Broadband and Digital Opportunities webinar on North Carolina broadband infrastructure. Today, many members of the Broadband Infrastructure Office will be providing updates on the state's progress to deploy high-speed internet access across North Carolina and make a more connected state. We will be recording this webinar, and please use the chat function to add in any questions. We will answer all that we can at the very end. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Angie Bailey, Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office.
Thank you, Crystal. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Angie Bailey, Director of Broadband Infrastructure Office, and with me I have George Collier, one of two Deputy Directors for the office, and Gretchen Ramirez, our second Deputy Director for the office. And while I say that, I want to really thank them for everything that they do to support this work, because I couldn't do what I do without them. Same goes for Ben Shelton, who is Project Manager for Center for Geographic Information and Analysis. Housed at NCDIT, they manage all our mapping work. And so I appreciate being on here with them this morning. And thanks also to Crystal for all that you do. So let's dig in. Next slide, please. So we wanted to provide the webinar this morning. We know folks are busy. There's a lot going on, but obviously because there's a lot going on, we wanted to make sure everyone is aware of kind of what we're working on, especially with the BEAD program. So we'll spend a fair amount of time on BEAD and kind of our status on that program. We'll talk a bit about mapping and eligible locations, a little bit about the no BEAD locations, which we'll get into, a quick update on our American Rescue Plan Act funded programs, and then a quick discussion on compliance and monitoring. And then we'll leave some room for questions at the end. So BEAD, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, is funded by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration at U.S. Department of Commerce. So we've been working with BEAD as a state for several years, as all the states across the country are. And so this is just a quick slide on kind of what we've been working on the past few years. These were all kind of requirements from the NTIA for a local coordination effort, a 5-year action plan. We had an initial proposal, volume 1, which kind of outlined our mapping and challenge work related to the BEAD program, an initial proposal, volume 2, that outlined kind of how we were going to approach our subgrantee selection. So those were both approved by NTIA in 2024. We had an extensive BEAD challenge process that y'all are probably familiar with. Where basically entities have a chance to challenge locations, viability, the eligibility of locations, households, and businesses to be eligible for the BEAD program. That data was approved by NTIA May 8th of this year. We had run a pre-qualification window for applicants. Our initial window was from September of last year through February 3rd. 2025, and then we had just reopened it on May 30th, 2025, knowing that we were going to kind of be digging into BEAD, our subgrant selection later this summer. We also had Session Law 2024-55 was passed in November of 2024, which was our kind of BEAD program language from the state legislature. So there's a lot that's been happening. Next slide, please. And then on June 6th, and we knew that this was coming, but the NTIA restructured the BEAD program. And so there was a BEAD restructuring policy notice released on June 6th. And again, every state and territories in the country are participating in BEAD. And so this was a nationwide change. And essentially it required all states to finish their subgrantee selection process within 90 days. So by September 4th, all states have to submit a final proposal to NTIA, which outlines all of the award recommendations from the state for the BEAD, for last mile broadband deployment. And it requires a technology neutrality component and states to run something called the benefit of the bargain round. It also changed up the scoring. It stripped out some of the scoring, and there's a focus now on just the minimal BEAD program outlay, which is basically the total BEAD funding required for the project, the cost per broadband serviceable location, and then the combination of proposals with the lowest overall cost to the program. So it's very focused on cost. And so we reviewed what came out June 6th, and North Carolina committed to completing its subgrantee selection process in this timeline. So so next slide, please. And we wanted to kind of just review what we've done since June 6th. So we, kind of immediately jumped into all the guidance documents that are involved in this program to kind of make sure that we're being consistent. So the BEAD restructuring policy notice kind of supersedes our initial proposal, volume 2, our state legislation essentially. And so what we're looking at is this combination of what's in the original Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, what's in the original Notice of Funding Opportunity from NTIA, and then the new BEAD restructuring policy notice. And so we immediately kind of jumped in to coordinate with state leadership on the conflicts that we now had with our original state BEAD legislation. And thanks to our legislative affairs team, who's amazing. They've worked with state leadership on new language for BEAD. And so that exists in House Bill 125, which is the continuing budget operations bill. I think it's a mini budget now that passed, the BEAD language passed the Senate, and then House Bill 819 is our DIT agency bill. And that language passed, same mirrored language passed the state, the House. So that was done really quickly, and we appreciate everyone's coordination on that. Next slide, please. So then we immediately kind of updated our pre-qualification guidance that we had just republished end of May, and we basically stripped out what was no longer required. The pre-qualification is the opportunity for applicants to pre-qualify. They have to demonstrate their financial, technical, managerial, operational capacity to participate in BEAD. And so we updated the guidance. We republished June 20th. We amended the end date, the due date. And so any broadband providers that wanted to participate in BEAD, the last mile program, had to submit pre-qualification materials by July 7th. And so we have had, Gretchen and her team have been working kind of nonstop with our pre-qualification work, along with KPMG, who supports us in this process. And we have about 30-ish companies working to pre-qualify. They're close to being done. And so we'll be publishing a list, but once everyone is through with the process. Next slide, please. And so our BEAD, continuing on the BEAD steps since June 6th, we also republished our map of eligible locations. And Ben is going to talk about eligible locations in a few minutes, so I'm not going to go into detail. But there was work, of course, around that to comply with the restructuring notice. And we did have to resubmit our final BSL list to them again. Next slide. And so then after that, we had to make sure that we were clear on our program design. Again, we'd been working towards subgrantee selection. We were thinking of doing it later in the summer. And we've kind of basically our design now is focused on individual BSLs. So providers can apply for projects within counties as individual BSLs, or obviously groupings of BSLs. We drafted a letter to NTI requesting an initial proposal correction to incorporate the terms of the restructuring policy notice into our initial proposal. That's a requirement for states that wanted to participate. We had a timeline on when that would be submitted. So we submitted ours June 27th. That was approved by NTIA on July 7th. And again, that's kind of it, basically saying to NTIA, hey, we agree to adhere to the new policy notice, and that supersedes what else was already in our initial proposal volume 2 that may be a conflict. So we sent that was approved. Then we kind of had to run through, how are we going to deal with this application process in such a short window? So kind of, how are we updating our project areas, our scoring matrix, the negotiation process, the actual application pieces, developing our grant system, and then kind of this decision around what's the application deadline versus, we also need time to obviously evaluate. So our applications, well, we have a slide on timing in just a second. So again, that was another piece we've been working on. Next slide, please. So then we made additional updates to the BEAD planning tool, which is our mapping tool. And again, Ben's going to cover that. We did publish our guidance on July 11th for the subgrantee selection. I was hoping for sooner, but there was just so many pieces. We really needed to be clear that we had touched on everything. And then of course, that included we published our application materials July 11th. We did publish our first batch of FAQs last Friday, which is on the same page as our application materials. We're getting a lot of questions in, so we plan to update those this week. And then we had a webinar for our applicants yesterday morning, so that was good. So our broadband providers in the state are working hard to participate and submit projects. Next slide. And so we're not going to go into the application materials again. They're published, and you all can dig in as much as you want to, but just to touch on, there's basically 4 pieces. There's our EBS. EBS is our Enterprise Business Services System. That's our online grants portal. So there's a short form in there, which basically allows us to maintain that record and that project application in our grant system. There's a BEAD proposed project data template, which is essentially where we're capturing the broadband serviceable locations that are going to be part of the project application, and a lot of, the amount requested, a lot of other data that goes into the final proposal. There's the project technical plan and evidence submission, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then there's just a slew of certifications that what companies have to comply with to participate in BEAD. And that is kind of in lieu of having a grant agreement at the end of all of this work. Not in lieu of, but it's the early recognition of all these certifications that will be in our final grant agreement. Next slide. So again, I just wanted to touch on this because, of course, there's a lot of discussion about the technology neutrality component of the program. So we do require a project technical plan and evidence submission. And so this is a template there's a different template based on technology type. So there's one for fiber, one for hybrid fiber coax, one for low Earth orbit satellite, one for licensed fixed wireless, one for unlicensed fixed wireless. And so if you're applying for a project, you have to fill out this evidence template for each project based on the technology type. And so it's capturing the technical documentation for the project, but also has to provide evidence to demonstrate the scalability of the infrastructure if the applicant wants the project to be considered as a priority broadband project. So in our scoring process, you can either be considered a priority project. Those are awarded first, essentially, or non-priority. And so to be a priority broadband project, you have to meet this definition, which is here on this slide. And it basically, the speeds are required for all the projects, but you also have to, the technology has to easily scale, can easily scale speeds over time to meet the evolving connectivity needs of households and businesses, and support the deployment of 5G, successor wireless technologies, and other advanced services. And this language comes from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, so that can't be changed. So this is a big piece of what states are looking at now, is how do we ensure the scalability of these technologies? Next slide, please. And so again, on scoring, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but basically, and you can read the guidance, we will select so again, applicants have to apply within individual counties, as we did with our grant program and our CAB Complete Access to Broadband program. And then we compare the projects within a county. We'll select the combination of project proposals with the lowest overall cost to the program. And so this may involve selecting a proposal that's the lowest cost option for a given set of broadband serviceable locations, or as part of the combination of selected projects with the lowest overall cost to the program. priority broadband projects will receive prioritization for award, followed by non-priority projects. Next slide, please. And then, so there's a whole deduplication process. I won't read all of this, but this is in our guidance. This is, there's a text heavy slide because, to be honest, on scoring and deduplication and negotiation, I wanted to stick to exactly what we've said in our guidance. But there is a process, of course, as with our Great Grant Program, our CAB program, projects may overlap. If they don't overlap, that's fairly straightforward. If they do, then we have to determine the kind of highest ranking projects and deduplicate from there. So we will preliminary assign projects for award for priority projects with non-overlapping project areas where the cost is not excessive. We have not set an excessive cost threshold in North Carolina. We'll then start the deconfliction process for applications that propose to serve overlapping project areas, beginning with the highest ranking where the cost is not excessive, and then we kind of keep repeating the process. We may also offer applicants the opportunity to reduce their proposed costs for projects with excessive costs. And so that's, yeah, I'm curious. I'm really curious to see what we will get, but we've had really, the indications are that I think we'll have really strong participation. Next slide, please. And so then, and again, I won't go into all of this, but what's a little bit different about BEAD is that then there's an opportunity for direct negotiations. So if we have BS broadband serviceable locations where there's no application submitted, we do have the chance to either offer additional mini rounds or to do direct negotiations. And so this language on this slide is the same as what's in our guidance. And so you can dig into that, but essentially we'll be negotiating directly with providers to get those covered. And we'll prioritize negotiations with priority broadband project awardees when possible. Next slide. So, and this is again is a text heavy slide. I think this is our last BEAD slide, but just to kind of, I just wanted to relay that in North Carolina, what we chose to do, there's a fair amount of information there's a huge amount of information that gets collected for these applications, and some of it just really couldn't be collected in this timeline. And so what we will do is once we have a tentative award for an applicant for a particular project, we'll notify them of the tentative award. And then this bullet 2 here, second bullet, is all the additional information that they're going to have to provide. So they more information on network design, a diagram, project costs and budget, build out timeline, milestones, capital investment schedule. And some of that requires stamps from a professional engineer. We just didn't think there's any way for these companies to provide this in this short timeline and have it be accurate, to be honest. We would rather, and again, I think a lot of the companies working to pre-qualify are companies that we've worked with through our GRATE and CAB programs. I think that's a benefit in our state that we've already been doing so much with broadband deployment funding. So I think our providers are prepared. We will be collecting all this once we've made a tentative award. Similarly, with this, the letter of credit and the performance bond discussion, we'll be collecting the commitment for the letter of credit or the commitment letter for the performance bond when we made the tentative award. And I think this is different than some of the other states, because the other issue is that, you know, I think providers don't have a sense of what they're going to be awarded. They're applying for a lot and waiting to see what will happen. And so we'd like their letter of credit or performance bond commitment to come in once they actually have an accurate idea of what their tentative award is. And then they'll get those commitment letters. And then there's a whole nother set of information that will be collected once we contract. And I think this is the last slide. Is there one more BEAD slide? Oh yeah, the timing. Sorry. So basically right now, applications again are due next Wednesday, July 30th by 11:59 p.m. Then obviously we'll be working on application review, scoring, direct negotiation from July 31st to August 26th. We are already working on the drafting of the final proposal, which is the document that gets submitted to NTIA. on September 4th. We will have a final, we'll have the final proposal posted for public comment on August 27th. August 27th to September 2nd, there's a 7-day window that's required. So people that we haven't figured out, we haven't published what our process will be for receiving comments. So we will get that out to everyone, but we'll take public comments and then those can be incorporated into the final proposal before we submit it. So we'll have 1 day, September 3rd, to incorporate, or we can be incorporating as we go through those 7 days. Final proposal submitted September 4th. And then NTIA has 90 days to review the state's final proposals and sign off. So we'd be looking at contracting projects at the end of the year, unless NTIA changes their timeline. And so again, contracting there'll be additional information we'll collect during that process, like the letter of credit itself and some other details that we will need. And then that's where we are. They have 4 years to build. And then there's a 10-year interest period. So I hope that's useful. I know obviously it's $1.5 billion. We know stakeholders around the state are very interested in the program and how it will work. And so we wanted to get you this update. If you have input, please let us know. But right now we're going to move to the eligible locations.
Thanks, Angie.
So I'll turn it over to you, Ben.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to kind of cover a little bit about where we're at with the mapping and the eligible locations for BEAD, but also just where you can find more information on our websites and things like that of where the awards are being made and what can be how you can maybe contribute to some of the pieces of the BEAD program. Next slide, please. And as Angie mentioned, last fall, we went through a challenge process for BEAD where we took all of the eligible locations, the unserved and underserved homes and businesses in the state, put them into a challenge process where we can gather feedback from stakeholders and providers on changes to those eligible locations that need to be made. And the results of that, we came out with 171,000, just a little over 171,000 unserved and underserved homes and businesses that would be eligible for BEAD, and also 1,215 community anchor institutions. So that was the results. I think the ending point was a little bit in the beginning of this year. But then since then, we've made modifications to those eligible locations to kind of keep up to date with what's going on and where we're seeing changes. Especially we had the CAB program, the Completing Access to Broadband program earlier this year, where we funded 60,747 of those eligible locations. And so those were removed off the map and they'll be included in our final proposal to NTIA as no BEAD locations, which I'll get into what no BEAD means here in a little bit and how there's different classification codes. So anything we change from that initial challenge process, unserved and underserved locations coming out, if we change any of those eligibility definitions on those locations, we have to document all of this to NTIA. And so that's where we're tracking all of these changes going forward. So that will be included in our final proposal. So along with the 60,000 CAB awards, we also have just over 7,000 locations that we're listing as no BEAD because they have been removed in the latest version of the fabric. So they're no longer present on the FCC maps. And these are scenarios where it's an empty parcel, the home is no longer present, or if it's a shed or barn or location that doesn't need broadband service, they've been removed from the fabric, and we can document that and remove them from eligibility. So we can focus the funding through BEAD to those locations that need the service. There's also 139 community anchor institutions that were removed out of that 1,215 due to changes in that restructuring policy notice by NTIA, just different classifications that no longer qualified as a community anchor institution. So we removed those and a couple of small local awards we reclassified as eligible commitment or existing commitments in those areas, so they were no longer eligible for BEAD. So with the results of all those modifications we've made over the past month or so is there are 103,760 BEAD eligible broadband serviceable locations and 1,076 community anchor institutions that now roll into the program and can receive applications. Next slide. And here's just a quick snapshot of the current status map of all the locations in the state. So what we do is we ingest all of this stuff from the broadband data collection coming from the FCC, where providers report service around the state. And we kind of look for the inverse, where the service is not being reported, where those locations that do not have adequate service at the different speed thresholds that qualify as unserved and underserved. That goes into that challenge process back last fall. We gather all that input, but then we also track all of the different state broadband expansion projects, federal projects, and local projects, and those need to be removed off the map. So in this map, what you're seeing are the red locations are what's remaining, those 103,000 locations that I mentioned that are now eligible for BEAD. And then the green locations represent all of the current funding that we've allocated through state programs. And then the light blue are federal programs like the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, USDA Reconnect projects, and those kind of federal projects that have been allocated around the state. And then the darker blue are the local projects where a local municipality or a county have gone out and done their own local projects and funded expansion. So next slide, please. And I just wanted to highlight real quickly our NC1 map broadband page. So the address is there in the top right. If you go to nc1map.gov, there's a data projects page just specifically dedicated for broadband, where we put out all of our GIS data and maps and applications so that, create some transparency on the data side to put these things out for the public and for providers participating in BEAD. There is a BEAD planning tool. That's where that BEAD planning tool can be found, where you can see all the eligible locations around the state for BEAD. But I specifically wanted to highlight this dashboard. It's kind of a newer dashboard in the last few months that we put together, where we're tracking all of these projects going forward. As you can see, we have 321 total awards. All of those are from the American Rescue Plan Act funds, where we've allocated, $674 million to cover over 250,000 homes and businesses across the state and expand broadband service. And what you're seeing visually on the map there is all of these projects are being symbolized by the project status. So you can see those projects in the lighter blue or the yellow are the newer contracted awards. And then as you go through the status of the projects, as we get kind of quarterly reports from providers on the status of where those projects are, we are updating this dashboard to reflect as they get into the design phase, construction phase, and completed. So the darker blue on this map are completed projects. So you can filter this map based on county, program, provider, and kind of go see at a local level what has been funded and where those projects are. And also we try to give as much project information as we can, required speeds, required completion dates, things like that. You can find out more information by clicking on any of those awards. Next slide, please. Alongside that awards dashboard, what we're also putting out there is for any stakeholder, community member, they can go out onto our status map. We have a location status map that's right at the top of the page, where anybody can go in and search for a specific address, just so they can understand what's the FCC provider reporting data saying is service at my location. So it'll say if it's unserved or underserved or served, give you some details about that service. But also it provides details about any of those projects that were in that previous dashboard. So you can quickly see on this map that this location is an unserved location, but it has received a completing and access to broadband award that will, by the required completion date, hopefully expand service at that location. So you can see that there's hope on the horizon that their service is going to be improved through that project and get more details about the provider and speeds and things like that. We also do all the federal and local projects on this. So if you query a location and it has a federal award, you can get project details about that award as well. And then if you're interested in what's nearby, we also have a nearby tool that's in the left-hand pane that you can select that nearby tool, click on the map, and it'll show you kind of what service is in a radius around that location. Say within a mile of that location, there's other cable or fiber service. You can kind of understand where those services are located in relation and maybe where those projects might be expanding service into those areas. And so this is a mobile and desktop friendly application, so you can use it on your mobile phone, search for any location, and quickly get information about what's going on in your area. Next slide, please. So I definitely recommend everyone going to NC1Map if you haven't before. There's a lot of GIS and mapping data out there, but broadband specifically, we've been putting out as much information as we can to get stakeholders and community members, things about what's going on, create some transparency. If you're also interested in participating in our BEAD program in terms of identifying locations that may not need broadband service, there's a process that NTIA has set up through our final proposal. We can submit what's called no BEAD locations. Those are locations that we have enforceable commitments, like our recent CAB awards, things like that need to be removed from the BEAD eligibility so we don't fund things twice, or so that we don't fund things that don't need broadband service in general. So we've put out a lot of guidance out on the ncbroadband.gov website about how to participate in this process, the data templates and things like that. And so if you go out to that website, you can find a lot more information about, what kind of no BEAD locations we're looking for. And it also details all the different evidence. So if we do make a change to the BEAD map and remove something from eligibility, we have to have, really sound evidence that that's the case on the ground level, that location does not need funding before we remove it from eligibility. So definitely take a look at those guidance documents out there if you're interested. The broadband providers and other stakeholders, they can all submit data with supporting evidence. And it all requires credentialing and things through our data exchange. So I'll provide more information on an upcoming slide about that. But we're trying to collect all of this data at the same time that the applications are going on. So that deadline is the same as the application deadline. It's July 30th. Because we need to have time to adjudicate and go through all of that evidence to make sure that these locations need to be removed from the map from funding before we include them in our final proposal. Next slide. And here's kind of an overview of all the different reason codes that NTIA has released, that reasons why a location may be a no BEAD location. We're really focusing on codes 1, 2, 4, and 5 here. 6 and 7, we haven't really had a need for those codes. Reason code 3, we have already done that process. That's the 7,000 locations that we've removed off the map because the latest version of the FCC's map has removed those locations due to various reasons, being empty parcels and things like that shouldn't be a serviceable location. Reason codes 1 and 2, though, we are focusing on ourselves internally, but any stakeholder and provider can submit those to us as well with evidence that those locations should not have broadband service. It's an empty parcel, it's a dilapidated barn or other structure that doesn't need service. Reason code 2, it doesn't need mass market service. Those are instances where it's kind of like a government building or something like that uses more of an enterprise service and not mass market service that the FCC, that the BEAD program is really focused on rolling out. And codes 4, those are those enforceable commitments similar to the completing access to broadband awards or local awards that we've learned about, that we need to remove eligible locations because they've already gotten funding through something else. And reason code 5, a provider can submit that if it's a kind of privately funded expansion into an area. They definitely have to submit very strict documentation that has been served through their own expansion. And it has to be included on the latest FCC map. So on that reason code 5, we'll only accept it if it's currently showing in the, I think it's version 6 of the FCC maps that are currently available. Next slide, please. So, we're trying to limit the no BEAD locations. We're trying to focus on those that are really clearly situations that need to be removed from eligibility so we can focus on the truly serviceable locations. So any stakeholder can submit evidence and information to us using the data template that's linked below. And there's a guidance document that's out there as well. If you go onto the ncbroadband.gov website, there is a whole section that's about submitting these no BEAD locations and updating our eligible locations for BEAD. And so, like I said on the last slide, this is all due by July 30th. And, it's a very quick turnaround. We understand that it's a lot to tackle. We are tackling it ourselves internally and going through locations as we speak to identify any of these that need to be included in our final proposal. But definitely want to welcome anybody who wants to participate, stakeholders, to submit those data files to us. And this is all done through the biodata exchange. It is a credentialed service, so we definitely want to get your information as we can. There's, I think on the next slide, there should be some information. There's a website, or not website, an email address, bead@nc.gov. You can submit anybody in your organization who needs credentials to us there, and we can work to get those credentials and you access to our online folder system that we use to kind of exchange information and documentation. So definitely email us as soon as you can if you're interested in participating, and we'll get you set up with those credentials so you can provide that information to us. So it's a quick turnaround, so we understand it's a lot, and the quicker you get involved, the quicker we can get you those credentials. I think that's all I had.
Awesome.
Thanks, Rachel.
Ken. Yep. So we're just going to go over some of the ARPA funded stuff that we've done most recently. Next slide, Crystal. Okay, so this is just kind of a timeline. So it just goes through the different funding programs that we've had since 2018. So we started with Great State, and then we moved on to some federal dollars, and then CAB, completing access to broadband. We did our first round. And then also our second round, this is going to give the deployment timelines. And then there's some digital opportunity information on here. And then BEAD, of course, we're going to start that soon. Next slide. Okay, so this slide just kind of gives an overview of everything that we've done for the division. So this would be the Division of Broadband and Digital Opportunity. So we've awarded about $725 million to connect 255,000 homes and businesses. And this is throughout 25 and 26. Also provide computers and digital skills resources, which is quite amazing for us. Next slide. Okay, so this just kind of gives an overview of the funding programs and kind of where we are. So with our infrastructure programs, $937 million. Again, this goes through Great Grant, completing access to broadband, which is CAB. We also have stopgap solutions we have not released yet. We are running, everybody forgets, we are running broadband pole replacement. So it's a $100 million bucket, and we've awarded about we've awarded about $1 million in that. And then we have our broadband mapping here as well. We have obligated $1 million. So it's quite a large bucket. We have ARPA still left. So we're pausing on ARPA, doing BEAD, and then we'll come back and finish up. We also have some digital literacy and awareness. So we've got our information here about obligating $48.5 million. We did award grants to 74 organizations and state government entities to serve almost all of the counties. So we're pretty proud of that as well. Next slide. Okay, so completing access to broadband CAB. The last round that we did of 2025 just ended June 7th. We did 138 projects in 85 counties. And then the serviceable locations that we awarded were 69,226. The NCDIT funding is $171.6 million. And then our broadband provider matching funds, $76 million. We did have 7 counties that provided matching funds to us. So it did kind of change their max budgets a little bit. And we were able to work with them on getting that funding through. Again, all contracted June 7th, just in time to start BEAD. Next slide. Okay, and then these are some legislative priorities. I'm going to hand it over to Angie, and she's going to go over these.
Thank you. And yeah, so just quickly, I think, and you all may have seen this slide before. So these were our legislative priorities that we've had since the spring. All the bullets except the first one, we added in the BEAD alignment with new federal guidance, obviously after June 6th. We also still need our BEAD funding appropriated. But so we're still seeking the satellite broadband grant program. It's in our original legislative priority list. That language is in House Bill 819. We have asked to use $50 million in ARPA funding for rebuild, repair, replace, and hardening broadband infrastructure damaged during Helene. We've asked to allow expansion of the broadband pole replacement program to expand eligible poles and include undergrounding. And then we've asked for authority to transfer balances among our programs once the program's been implemented. And so as you can see, so all of these are, the language for all of these either exists in House Bill 125 or House Bill 819. And again, we added the BEAD language just in the past, last month. And so we're hoping that this is still very much on the radar of our legislative leadership. They'll be coming back into town soon, and I believe over the next couple months. And so this actually gives us a chance to, we can see what passes with this language. And we will, again, be jumping back into ARPA after we get the BEAD project submitted. So lots happening. All right, and we did want to touch quickly on compliance and monitoring, because obviously we're working hard to get the money out, but then making sure that we are monitoring it, the projects is super, super important. So George Collier, I'll turn it to you.
All right, thank you, Angie. Next slide, please. All of our internet service providers that partnered with NCDIT were required to enter into an agreement with us. The Great Grant Program, the Growing Rural Economies with Access to Technology program, all of our providers are considered subrecipients. This is a traditional grant program. This slide here kind of gives you all the magnitude, the volume, number of projects, and the amount of funding that our team is administering here at the Broadband Infrastructure Office. Our Completing Access to Broadband program is a procurement. It is a public procurement where we issued scopes of work in participating counties. And all of our providers in that program are considered contractors. Okay, that's a very important distinction in the GREAT program and the CAB program. But in total, we're monitoring 321 projects, administering $675 million. And our internet service providers that we've partnered with are committing to providing broadband access to 255,000 plus locations. Next slide, please. Now, next slide, please. The way that our programs were funded, and we were authorized funding in Session Law 2021-180 using two sources of ARPA funds, and that's the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, SLFRF, and the Capital Project Fund, CPF. I think it's important to distinguish between the two funding sources. GREAT was wholly funded using SLFRF funds. There is an obligation deadline of December 31st, 2024. We met that obligation deadline since those funds were essentially awarded to the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office and authorized to NCDIT through the session law that I referenced. But I think it's important to note that we do have an expenditure deadline, that all of these projects that were funded out of SLFRF funds have to be essentially, we have to expend our funds by December 31st, 2026. That's our shot clock. That's what all of our providers are working towards now. Recently, as of December, Governor Cooper and the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office requested an extension of the expenditure deadline to December 31st, 2027. Now, I think it's important to note that this approval may require congressional approval, and I emphasize may, because I know there's a lot of you all here that are a lot smarter than me. Y'all may want to look at the ARPA legislation, federal rules. There's not a December 31st, 2026 deadline written into the legislation. itself, but U.S. Treasury has, in their FAQ document in their final rule did note that. But as far as the legislation itself, there is not a deadline. Capital project funds and SFLRF funds do fund the completing access to broadband program. There is a completion deadline, substantially complete. That definition is broad. We've got to provide and work with U.S. Treasury to get a better understanding of what substantially complete is. However, that all of those projects funded with CPF dollars must be completed by or substantially completed by December 31st, 2026. Now, we did ask for an extension to that deadline to December 31st, 2027. Governor Stein and North Carolina General Assembly members requested an extension to our federal congressional members. We requested that extension to December 31st, 2027. As far as we know, the approval seems to be a policy decision of the CPF and U.S. Department of Treasury staff. Next slide, please. And when we're managing, the number of projects and the amount of funding that we're managing, it would not come or be a surprise that, all the entities that we're reporting to, first and foremost, we're obligated to the residents of North Carolina. These are tax dollars that we're using to help incentivize broadband providers to build their infrastructure to provide broadband access. But regular reports that we provide, the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office and their representative Deloitte. We're getting ready to start a yearly monitoring exercise with Deloitte and NC Pro here very soon. We report regularly to the U.S. Department of Treasury, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration for the BEAD program, the North Carolina Office of the State Auditor. They completed their single audit or their fiscal audit of us this past fiscal year. I'm sure we'll be engaging with OSA again here shortly. We also have our own internal auditors and then the North Carolina General Assembly. Next slide, please. So shifting gears, I am also providing an update or giving you all some information on resources. Next slide, please. As everyone on this call knows, that broadband is kind of broadband issues there's two big issues: broadband infrastructure and digital opportunity, and the resources we have available at NCDIT, and we partner with the Center for Geographic Information Analysis. I think Ben talked extensively about the NC1 map and the North Carolina Broadband Awards dashboard. We provide a lot of information on these maps around availability and where what's publicly available, where service is, where locations have adequate service or broadband service. We also provide information about our awards. That I would encourage everyone on this call to look at the NC1 map. But on the other side of that coin here, for digital opportunity, where we have a tech resource finder, provides a resource for local organizations that provide public computers, Wi-Fi, and digital classes. I think this is very important for everyone on this call to understand that we do have that resource for your residents and all the folks that you all are trying to help, which is every resident in North Carolina. NCDIT also partnered with NC211 and the United Way of North Carolina to offer digital skills assessments, helping set up an email address and connecting callers to locations that offer free Wi-Fi, computer labs, and computer skill classes. You can go to this website or just dial 211, and someone from that organization will be able to assist with these types of offerings. Next slide, please. For any questions that you have, we do have email addresses. If you have any questions about BEAD specifically, you can email the address here, bead@nc.gov, the CAB program, Completing Access to Broadband program, CAB program at nc.gov. Any questions about great program, great at nc.gov. Or if you have any questions about digital opportunity, any of those offerings I talked about on the Tech Resource Finder or NC211 or the NC211 partnership, or anything digital opportunity related, please email digitalopportunity@nc.gov. And in closing, I will turn it over to Crystal Dickerson.
Hello. So now we're at the exciting part at the end where we get to answer your questions. So I don't see any questions in the chat yet. Does that mean that we explained everything so well that you have no questions? I bet you might have some burning questions. So please don't hesitate to add those now. On standby, you've got us for 9 full minutes.
Crystal, while we're waiting to see if folks have questions, I just want to kind of, well, one, I want to thank folks on the call. I think we've got a lot of broadband advocacy folks, stakeholder organizations, some providers, for doing what you do to make sure that we're doing what we need to do and that our providers are doing what they need to do. It's such a huge topic, and we have so much funding to solve this problem, which we didn't have for decades. So I want to thank y'all for being here. I also just want to say, we're looking at 5 weeks away from posting our tentative awards for BEAD. So there is a lot that's going to shift in the next 2 months with those tentative awards, and then also seeing what the legislature does in potential changes to our remaining ARPA funds. So we would, obviously are planning to another webinar for once we can update on all of that, which is coming soon.
Okay, it looks like we've received one question in the chat from Zoe. Zoe asked, can y'all provide any more information on the CAIs that were removed from eligibility?
That is a good question. I don't have the list in front of me, which I should have brought, but we would be happy to email it to you. It's basically just some of the categories that were removed in the restructuring notice. And so we had to pull out a handful. And so Stephanie Jane Edwards on our team is super diligent and very committed to community anchor institutions. And she worked with that, and we can get you what was removed exactly.
Perfect. Okay. Corey asks, what's the role of county government in the BEAD process?
So for BEAD, as far as the subgrantee selection process, there's not a specific role for county government. It's a very prescriptive program in terms of the federal rules. But I think there is a lot of room for county participation in kind of the early challenge work with determining what locations were eligible. There's some space for county participation in this no BEAD process. But again, since everything's so condensed, we've only got 1 more week on that. I think that also once we make the awards, I think helping counties understand what's happening in their communities, county residents understanding what awards are being made and kind of what's the difference between BEAD and ARPA. I think that's still a huge piece. So I hope that helps. Does anyone else have thoughts?
Counties and other organizations across the state were very integral in providing details up front for us when we did our local coordination piece of BEAD. So making sure that we understood the needs of the individual areas. We received another question from Brian. Are there still 5 points in the BEAD scoring if a proposal will serve all unserved CAIs in a county?
There's not. So it's open. It's kind of wide open. So because we've gone to individual BSLs, which includes kind of individual CAIs, we will see what we get.
And then we had another request for the list of CAIs that were removed. So we'll keep track of those folks that are interested in receiving more. Thank you.
And we can publish that again. So we published our first FAQs last Friday. We have a lot more to publish this week, and we can explain the CAI categories in that too.
Perfect. We're looking at getting some updated FAQs this week. Any other questions?
It's a lot to take in. We agree.
Wait another minute and see if anyone populates the chat. Jessica asks about speed tiers. Can you speak to that, please? Are the points listed in the IPv2, which is, I believe, the initial proposal volume 2?
The whole scoring in IPv2 has been wiped out because of the new BEAD restructuring rules. And so none of that scoring is relevant any longer. So it is a little confusing because we committed, and all the states commit to this new BEAD restructuring rules, but then we've got these IPv2s that are published that are, so then they're, some of it's right, some of it's wrong. So we are working internally to track everything in the IPv2 and to try to publish something that's makes a little more sense, and we will get something on that. It's just, it's the whole concept has shifted, so that's what makes it challenging.
Good question, Jessica. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we're on our final 2 minutes. Any other questions from attendees? Thank you, Jessica. Yes, this has been helpful, I hope, to some, hopefully to all. If you have any additional questions and you're not able to get them in the chat right now, please don't hesitate. I'm going to go back to that slide that George mentioned before. If the questions are on BEAD at nc.gov. That way we can assure you get the same written response as everyone else. And here are the other email addresses for other categories of contact. But we appreciate everyone being here today. We appreciate your questions. If there's anything else we can do to support you or answer your questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you so much for attending. Have a great day.